5058 chris@bbc.co.uk. Now, let's talk about this. 28 people feared dead after a series of powerful storms hit the US states of Indiana, Kentucky and Ohio. It's believed that the small Indiana town of Maryville has been completely destroyed. Let's speak to Joshua Miles, who's from Louisville, a spotter for the National Weather Service. He's a storm chaser for that department. Hi, Joshua.
Good day.
So, thanks for joining us. Well, what have you been seeing over the past 24 hours or so?
Well, we had a very powerful storm system move across the Midwest, and it's dropped at least 90 tornadoes yesterday across the area. One about 20 miles north of where I lived that I was chasing dropped a very powerful tornado. It ended up wiping out several towns in the area and killed a lot of people.
90 tornadoes, you said, hit yesterday.
Yeah.
Which I guess even, you know, when you've got the storms, which you do have from time to time, obviously in that part of the world, I mean, that even sounds like an awful lot for any period.
It is a substantial amount. The amazing thing about this outbreak was that it was so early in the season. Usually these outbreaks happen more in the end of April toward May, so we're still very early in the season for tornadoes.
And so when you're chasing the storms, how does that work? Particularly when you've got so many that could be coming from so many different directions.
That was the tricky thing about yesterday. Within the Louisville radius of about 100 miles, you had about 10 storms that were all turned tornadic. So they either had a tornado on the ground or they were rotating, could produce a tornado at any time. So it was extremely difficult for local media, for the National Weather Service to keep on track of that. The storm I was following that dropped the tornado, and I saw it from a distance, the wedge. There was a storm immediately behind it that also had what we call a wall cloud or a low rain that could produce a tornado at any time, and that's what I was tracking and watching. Luckily, that storm did not drop a tornado, or that really would have hampered the relief efforts.
And what do we know about this town I mentioned, Maryville? Reports saying that that's a town that's been completely destroyed. What do you know about that?
Well, it was part of that same large tornado that came across, and it hit Henryville, then it hit Maryville. Maryville's a small town. The blessing of this was if it had been 10 miles to the south, it would have gone through a very densely populated area. Maryville's a small town, and then Henryville's a town of about 2,000 people. So you're talking, you know, maybe Maryville, I believe, is around maybe 500. So you have all these buildings that are just gone. Really, there's no infrastructure left for them.
And I suppose, you know, the tragedy of all of this is, you know, that this is going to happen from time to time, but there's only so much you can do to prevent it.
Yeah, the National Weather Service did a great job. Very early on, 48 hours beforehand, they had put out that this was going to be a significant tornado outbreak. Schools had closed. In Henryville, they had waited, and the belief was that the students were still in the high school, and the high school hit and decimated. But luckily, 15 minutes beforehand, they put the kids on the bus and got them out of the way, or this would have been a whole lot worse as well. But schools had closed, businesses were shut down, people were preparing, but it was just too large a tornado.
Yeah, and you know, as I mentioned, 28 people feared dead. Could be more, of course, once some of those areas are properly investigated. Just finally, Joshua, when you're doing a job like this, and when you've been out and you've seen the sights you've seen, it must be something that sticks with you for days, isn't it? I would have thought. It must be, you know, it can't be easy to sleep, I wouldn't have thought, after going to see something like that.
I know the region. I have some friends. A good friend, the tornado went 3 miles south of his house. Seeing what we call the wedge from a distance, there was a sense that there was going to be a loss of life. You know, the United States has had a record number of tornadoes last year, and now off to the start this year. Really, there's some tornado fatigue for sure amongst people who live in the Central Plains and Midwest and the South.
Thank you, Joshua. Joshua Miles, who's a spotter for the National Weather Service, a storm chaser for the department on those powerful storms that have wreaked havoc in those US states of Indiana, Kentucky and Ohio. It's 8:42 now.